Klingons are back in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, but this time with a twist. Today I'll be talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3, Episode 3, Shuttle to Kenfori. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, go ahead and save this video for later, go watch the episode, and then come on back for the conversation. Spoilers for the episode in 3, 2, 1, and zombies! The Klingons are zombies. And some Starfleet people as well, but mostly the Klingons. Shuttle to Kenfori is another horror episode for Star Trek Strange New Worlds. This seems to be kind of a thematic element for the third season. Zombies on their own aren't new to Star Trek. We have seen versions of zombies in episodes of Enterprise and Lower Decks. Some people even argue that the Borg are a form of the zombie trope, albeit with different distinctions from traditional zombie norms. But this particular episode seems to be trying to capture more of that traditional zombie trope idea. It even goes so far as titling the episode Shuttle to Kenfori, which appears to be a play on words like Train to Busan, and Kenfori being a tribute to American actor Kenfori, who is known for his role in Dawn of the Dead. Admittedly, my feelings on this episode are a little mixed. As someone who considers themselves a horror enthusiast, I do love seeing new takes on the zombie trope, but I'm not entirely certain that this episode hits it in the way it wanted to. That being said, there are a lot of things in this episode that I do like that feature mostly with character development, but let's talk about the zombies first. Traditionally, zombies in storytelling are meant to directly... Traditional zombie stories are usually a direct criticism of something that is going on in our society. There's often a focus of the living being more dangerous than the dead, or the idea of mindless adherence to authority. A lot of the more modern zombie storytelling focuses on the dehumanizing effects of capitalism on society, or use the zombies to reflect discriminated groups in society that are struggling for equality. Flora-based zombie systems, as we see in this episode with the Chimera Blossom, also aren't new. Quite often, these plant-based zombie stories focus on the idea of humanity versus the environment and the power of nature. The Last of Us, for example, focuses on the dangers of unchecked societal collapse and the loss of humanity. But what does that mean in Star Trek, particularly in this episode? And how does that work here in this episode when the zombies literally propose no consequence to the crew of the Enterprise? So the obvious metaphor here seems to be that the zombies represent the past coming back to haunt the present. We see that with M'Benga, with Ortegas and Batel. And normally I would say that's a really interesting take for the zombie trope, but the problem for me here is the fact that there are very minimal consequences to the actual zombies in the storyline. The biggest lack of consequence for me in this episode is Dr. M'Benga. He even says in the beginning of the episode, "I never get caught," and he doesn't. He didn't get caught in the episode earlier under the Cloak of War, and he doesn't get caught in this episode either. He admits to Pike what he's done, but Pike decides to preserve their friendship over the chain of command and doesn't do anything about it. Now, granted, I recognize that we are trying to preserve some of the continuity between Strange New Worlds and TOS, and we know that M'Benga is on the Enterprise at the beginning of TOS. So I understand that he can't be terminated from his position, but I did feel like there should have been a larger consequence to his actions than just Pike being like, well, the mission never officially happened. I also wasn't really keen on the fact that the writers used the Klingon tradition of revenge as a means for absolving M'Benga of his crimes. They essentially use Baitha, who is a very cool and incredible character who I wish we could have seen more of, as a means for absolving M'Benga of what he did in the previous episode under the Cloak of War. Also, from a story writing perspective, I feel like this episode really lessens the impact of the ambiguity in the episode under the Cloak of War, which for me was the strongest aspect of that episode. The fact that it ended on such a we don't really know, but in our hearts we do know. And while I do think that M'Benga is going to continue to carry this guilt and the struggle with his own humanity because of the choice that he made, and probably lead to why he is no longer the chief medical officer on the Enterprise at the start of TOS, I feel like there could have been another way to demonstrate that impact in this particular episode. Also, Pike. Seriously? Seriously? The other character in this episode where consequence plays a significant role is, of course, Ortegas. Now, for me, this direction was much more interesting. I think we see the groundwork for this happening to Ortegas, this change in her character, way back in season 1. I think they were very slowly building up to this. But then, of course, with Ortegas, we don't really have a direct connection to the zombies because she is on the ship the entire time. So unless the zombies are, of course, this metaphor for the past catching up to the present, for me, that connection didn't really work in this sense. But the interesting thing about this is that Ortegas is really only reprimanded for what she does because the Klingon shuttle is still available for Pike and M'Benga on the planet. I truly believe that if that shuttle had not been there, then Ortegas would have been, she would have gotten off with maybe a small slap on the wrist, but they would have been, commending her heroics. But because the shuttle was still there and technically there was an opportunity for Pike and M'Benga to escape without all of that help that they got from her, she is, of course, reprimanded, which when you compare to M'Benga, I don't know, the consequences here just didn't really sit well with me. Now, do I think that Ortegas needed to be reprimanded for her insubordination? Absolutely. And I'm really glad that they did show us that because that is something that we don't really see often in Star Trek. We often see somebody taking their own kind of command or control, following their heart, so to speak, and saving everybody in the end. And because they save everybody, they are commended for it. And this is a situation where she may or may not have done the right thing. She may or may not have saved people, but she is not commended for it. Una is very strict with her about what she has done, that it can absolutely never happen again. And I like that she receives some consequence here because it does set us up for questioning what is going to happen to Ortegas in the future. Where is she going to go? Is she going to be dismissed from Starfleet? Is she going to leave of her own accord? Is something going to happen to prevent her from remaining on the Enterprise when Kirk takes command of the ship? I have some of my own theories of what I would like to see, but of course we're just gonna have to wait and find out as the seasons go on. Quickly going back to the zombie metaphor, again, with Batel, this idea of the past catching up with her, that kind of insinuates that there is something else in her past besides her interaction with the Gorn that is catching up with her, and while that might be possible and that might be something we see in further episodes, at this point in the story we don't really see that unless there is something more secretive about her relationship to Pike that we don't know about. So again, that metaphor and symbolism kind of falls short for me with her as well. Now, things I absolutely loved about this episode. I loved seeing Una in command. It was about time. I loved how it's an interestingly stark dichotomy between her and Pike. We see what she has learned from Pike, what she has taken from him, but we also see how she is very different in command on her own and how she would be a very different type of captain. And I think that's really important to see, a stark difference between the captain and the first officer's version of commanding the ship. Scotty, of course, is standout in this episode. We are really building up to that miracle worker Montgomery Scott in TOS, and I think that scene where he contradicts Spock and basically proves him wrong at the meeting was definitely one of the highlights of the episode for me. There is, of course, a lot of talk about the hair in this episode. For those of you who hadn't figured it out, they had to get all of the long-haired characters' hair in updos to prevent having to do something with CGI in the zero-G scenes. But yeah, Una's hair was not really working for me because the braid was way too close to the front. It just wasn't a great wig for her. What did you think of this episode? Let me know in the comments, and live long and prosper.